thinking.
Welcome to the Marketing Guides for Small Business podcast. I'm Jen Kelly, your host today, and I'm joined by Ian and Paul. Ken has recorded his answers as he is off doing other stuff. So today we're going to totally nerd out. We're discussing the history of marketing. When did marketing first begin? What did early marketing look like? What has impacted marketing over the years? And we're going to give our own 2 cents and a little bit of walk down memory lane about first marketing jobs, commercials that we always remember. So this is going to be a pretty light episode, but I hope very enjoyable. So listen in to learn where we've come from and where we're going. You'll definitely learn something you probably didn't know before about marketing. Plus, you may just get some ideas that help your business move successfully into the future by looking at what the past has taught us. So with that, let's go way back, Ian. When did marketing first begin?
Are you asking me this because I'm old, Jen? Is that what?
Not at all. We've got a youngster on the other side
That's
here.
right,
So,
that's right.
I mean, we're balancing it out.
That's right. So yeah, like when you look at history, it's really interesting. I did a little bit of digging here, and you can, as far as archaeologists can figure out today, and this could even go further back. You never know when with new archaeological finds, but they've actually found early logo usage in the 1500s BC. This is BCE. The history of marketing starts way earlier than most of us even think. There's some dispute around how marketing truly began, but many historians believe the concept started as early as 1500 BC. When Mesopotamian, I'm going to read this because I'll get it wrong if I don't, but Mesopotamian societies started mass production of goods, and they required some quality control. So they started to stamp on their products a signature mark so that you knew who was producing it. And this was the earliest form of logos that we have in archaeology. And it signaled to the buyers who created the product that they were purchasing. And it also allowed them an ability to return the product if there was a problem with it, because it actually had the merchants and the manufacturer's stamp on it. So they could return and they could get a refund or a replacement. And this continued to grow in importance as trading developed over the years and in different countries and different societies. So that's going way, way back. But also, archaeologists have found political campaign displays and commercial messages among ruins in Pompeii. Pompeii's cool because not cool because there was a volcano and people died, but cool because it captured kind of this still frame of what was going on at the time. And so they were able to find that there was political figures trying to garner support, and they had advertising related to that. And then, of course, that they see it in other cultures, Rome, Greece. Obviously, there's context of criers in early, like town criers in Eastern Europe, and that was a form of advertising. And then, as you come forward, everybody has probably heard of Gutenberg's press, but Gutenberg in 1450 CE invented the printing press. Mm-hmm. And so that's, really what got printing going. And of course, people could then reproduce an image multiple times, the same image. So that could be advertising. It could be a newspaper. It could be a book. And that's really when things started to pick up, because now people could get their message out across to many, many more people than they ever had before. Yeah. And that brings us to today.
Right. That's right. That's right. There's a few more, there's a few more areas of time. So Ken's going to take us through, what do we got here? The 1700s to the 1900s. So take it away, Ken.
Okay, so Jen asked about, the history from really the 1730s through the 1900s with magazines and billboards and also outdoor advertising. So the idea of magazines actually can be traced back to an Englishman named Edward Cave in the 1730s, who decided that putting together a mass publication that included readings from essays, poems, stories, political musings, etc., would be of interest to the general public. So as that started to catch on, it was found to be a really great solution to reach a large amount of people in a single geographic location. Next, really in the mid 1800s is when we saw the proliferation of billboards, and it culminated for, well over 100 years where it was really a major advertising factor. And it caught fire, really, I think, because of World War I and World War II. As examples, you can think of the Army recruitment, via Uncle Sam or Rosie the Riveter. Were also while they were in obviously print publications, they were also billboards that really played a big role. And so as people got to see that they could express themselves individually, companies started to do it, governments were doing it as well. In the early 1920s, radio came into play, and the first radio ad hit in 1922, and it was from AT&T. And so it lasted well, for a couple of decades, from the 20s and 30s. By the time TV came along in the early 1940s, and as a matter of fact, 1941 was the first time that a TV ad ran. And it was by Bulova Watch Company, actually. And the cost of the ad was a total of $9. You think about that now and compare it to like the holy grail of TV ads during the Super Bowl, which run well over several $1 million for just a 30-second airtime. So, we've come a long way, and the expense of advertising has certainly grown. By the time radio came into play, it started to displace, a big portion of the print advertising that was out there. It didn't eliminate it, but it certainly, started to eat into a chunk of that pie. Likewise, television did the same thing in the 1940s, because now not only did you have the audio, but you also had the visual presentation. So with the culmination of, now we've got several really great viable marketing channels, print, billboard, TV, and radio. And so people started to recognize the importance of really dialing in and making marketing more professional. And so the first marketing class or course was actually offered by the University of Pennsylvania back in 1902, called The Marketing of Products. And as broadcast media started to hit, brands started to spend millions of dollars, and they realized that they needed to find a way to tune their ad spend based on those channels. So in order to accomplish that, this concept of the marketing mix came into play. And this was really focused on, what are the essential ingredients that you need to have in your understanding of the product and service, and how that provides customers value. And so from there, we quickly evolved to this concept of the 4 Ps of marketing: product, promotion, place, and price, which soon led to marketing measurement strategies. So it made the ability for marketers to actually collect long-term aggregate data that was used to determine the relationship between the marketing mixes and their overall impact in sales. So the 4 Ps of marketing combined, with the marketing measures that were put in place, could allow marketers to aim their efforts toward placing the right message in front of the right consumer at the right time. Just think about, if you've ever seen the TV show Mad Men, you kind of see the history of marketing in the late 50s and throughout the 60s, and it kind of expresses a lot of this stuff. So it's really cool and fascinating to watch that show, to see how initially it was how can you create these incredibly sexy or audacious messages, but then now you needed to start to dial in and get focus groups and develop an understanding of who is the right target audience. So even though it was still broadcast, you were still trying to find a way to get that information in front of the right people at the right time.
That's so interesting. That is an age-old problem, right? The right message in front of the right people at the right time, and that $9 ad. That's that's pretty interesting. I didn't realize it cost that little. I guess adjusted for inflation, it was probably a chunk of money back then as well.
And Jen, what's really interesting too about that is that the 4 Ps of marketing have never gone out of style, right? Like they're still equally applicable today as they were when they were invented. It's people still talk about them in corporate marketing. They're still relevant to small business owners when they're thinking about their marketing, because you still need to have those things down pat, or you start to chase the shiny object.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you said that, because in prepping for this show, I was looking also into the future, what's going to happen, and a couple articles wanted to rename the 4 Ps of marketing, and they don't matter anymore, and they're now something else. But for those that aren't familiar with it or haven't had it drilled into them, like some of us have, the 4 Ps of marketing are product, price, place, and promotion. And like Ian said, they do apply to everything. They even apply to services, right? So what's the product or the service that you're selling? Where are you selling it? How are you promoting it? And what does it cost? So you definitely, whatever you want to call it, you definitely need to have thought through what you're going to do at each of those stages. Otherwise, you don't really have anything to sell, do you? So
and most businesses think about this stuff, but they don't think about it concisely sometimes. And I think that's where the 4 Ps has been super helpful over the years, is because it does give a framework to diagnose, like, what are we doing? First of all, plan, but then diagnose, hey, where are we at with our price? Where are we at with our promotion? Where are we at with our placement? Is our product still relevant? Whereas before that, I think it wasn't quite so concise. It was bringing a little bit more rigor and science into the approach of marketing, which I think is so relevant today.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Before putting together this episode, I was always either under the impression or really, was told that marketing really formally started in the 50s and 60s when this kind of framework and rigor was put into practice. But as we can see, it started much earlier than that. Next up is the 70s and 80s. And instead of giving a total history lesson there, I kind of wanted to branch off onto some kind of, fun walk down memory lane. For me anyways, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, admittedly glued to the TV. And so some of the earliest impressions I had about marketing and advertising, came from some of the ads that we saw during that time. So when I say we saw, so I grew up in Canada during that time. And then probably like most Canadians, a lot of our TV was influenced or were, brought in from channels in the US as well. So growing up, for sure, we, as a kid, I think one of the earliest negative experiences about advertising is you were advertised this cereal or these toys, and then not available in Canada. So
oh, you just poked a wound I have, Jen. Thank you.
So that's the experience of many Canadian children growing up.
Yeah, and you know what? Like younger generations who are listening to this podcast probably don't appreciate the fact that, like, we all look through the filter of our own lives, right? And it's important to remember that in those days, you really had television, you had magazines, which were massive, and you had newspapers, which were really your one source other than radio, right? You had radio, television, magazines, and newspapers, and other than, word of mouth, those were your main forms of advertising. Yes, you'd have billboards and that kind of stuff, but for in-home connecting with the consumer type advertising, and of course you could do some direct mail, but like Yellow Pages were massive for businesses back then. Magazines were massive to reach consumers. Newspapers, these were the vehicles, and you could use them in kind of traditional ways, or there was the guerrilla marketing ways where people would try to. It was almost like viral marketing, but going off the script of what traditional marketing was, because most people would mimic what the big companies were doing. But guerrilla marketing was really about like, how do we change it up and be very unique and try to capture people's attention on these mediums.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are Yellow Pages?
There's still a website called Yellow Pages.
Yeah, there is.
These were these giant books. And actually, it's interesting to think too, like, not only did you have giant, like huge Yellow Pages and White Pages, because that was your internet for getting like connecting information for businesses and people. But catalogs were massive too. And that was a form of marketing and advertising where, it would be Sears and it would be Consumers Distributing, and these different sources of, they would send these out like pretty regularly. In fact, I was a catalog kid that would take them around to homes and drop them off. And a catalog delivery kid. Yeah, that really dates me.
Yeah, but that's okay. You know what? As a little kid, I sold Regal. I don't know if you remember that. That was the little catalog you could get for all the. It was mostly gift wrap and stuff like that. But yeah, you drop off your magazine, come back a week later, take your order, and then physically go down and get it and then deliver it. So it's it was a different time. That's for sure. Paul, any memories of childhood ads or anything like that you remember?
Well, what I know about the 70s is the Rolling Stones had an album, Sucking in the 70s, and a new term was introduced into economics called stagflation. That's about what I know about the 70s. I know in the 80s, from a marketing perspective, that's kind of when CRMs were first kind of being introduced. Everyone had their Rolodex, which has now been replaced. And I think one of the earliest CRMs was Infusionsoft, now known as Confusionsoft, because it's all convoluted. But I think that's when that was introduced. But
that would have been even later, Paul.
What's that?
That's like late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. 80s. You have to remember is like IBM, Apple, Commodore 64s. Like that's the 80s.
Yeah, IBM. They said, who the hell would ever need a personal computer?
Yeah,
and BBSs were like the first consumer internet, like the bulletin board systems where you could actually connect with another human by sending a message.
Yeah, it was a big deal. Absolutely. Well, on that, Ian, let's talk about the internet and the advent of that, and then digital marketing.
Sure. And now we're going to get into the stuff that Paul's more familiar with.
We're totally dating ourselves here, but that's okay. Yeah. It was a fun few decades.
That's right. It's interesting because again, we look at history through our own filter sometimes. And I really like this topic, Jen, because I think it's good for everybody to remember how fast things, especially once the internet came into play, have really accelerated and moved and created behavioral change in society. I think that's a massive piece of this marketing history that we're talking about. But yeah, the digital marketing is super young. Like most sources would suggest it's 30 years old. But again, sometimes when we look back in history, we look for these milestone things that happened, and it doesn't mean that it's used extensively in society. So I would even suggest that really it wasn't until the 2000s where, the internet really started to take off. But here's some milestones that I think are helpful for people to remember. The internet in its broad use changed everything. It may be hard to believe, but there was a time not too long ago where it didn't exist, where you had to go use a Yellow Pages to find people's information, to connect with another business, to find a job, right? All of that kind of stuff. But with the advent of that, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the smartphone, but that's really what pushed the internet to a much bigger use. Initially, the internet was this used by the military, science, health, organizations, government organizations, and then it started to get broader usage. So even to think about search engines, which is really one of the key things that we use the internet for in order to find information, it really didn't take off. Like Google took off in 1998, and around that time, MSN Search, Yahoo were also created. Like that's when they started. So that's right at the 2000s, right? So it's interesting to think about that and you
Wasn't
can't.
AOL around back then?
Yes.
Yeah, the AOL. Yep. And it's important to remember too that even though they started around this time, it doesn't mean they were used broadly, right, by society as a whole, because people didn't understand it. People might not have had computers they didn't have computers as much as they do today, and they certainly, mobile phones didn't exist, right? Not in the way that we look at them as smartphones. On the social media side, there was something called MySpace, right? And that was the first social networking site. And then Facebook came along, and then there's been this explosion of social networks and channels where we interconnect. And of course, social media is now ubiquitous with the internet. Some other big milestones were cookies, not the kind you eat, but the kind that are often looked negatively upon now because it captures your information. But really, from a marketing standpoint, this was a huge development, because it meant that any business, if you wanted to target people with your message, you actually had a vehicle to do that. And yes, we've kind of progressed past cookies now, or are currently progressing past cookies, but it's all the same. It's advertisers need a way to connect with people they're trying to connect with. And then the last thing I would say that's just massive is the rise of smartphones. So the first true smartphone, I don't know if any of you guys ever used a BlackBerry, but that was really kind of the explosion of smartphones. I used it corporately. And before that, I had like a Palm Pilot. I don't know if you remember those, but it had no connection with the world unless I put it in its dock. So we're looking like that's 2003, right? And what was so amazing about the BlackBerry was that it could you could get email through cellular connections. You could text message people, but they had to have another device like this. You could do phone calls. Sounds crazy, I know. And it had web browsing, but it was horrible. It was super slow, not very nice to look at, not like today's.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until like 2007, 2012 where you saw this explosion of smartphones that's increased, and that broad availability and the improvement in those things have made smartphones really powerful for, yes, us as consumers, but also from a marketing perspective. So, I think, Paul, what about you? Anything in those?
It was the age of the modem, wasn't it?
Oh, and if we should have had a recording of a modem, because if you've never experienced that sound, like it just triggers you now, because
Yes. You're just like, don't pick up the phone. I'm on the internet.
And I'll tell you this. So the first computer I ever worked on was a friend had like an Apple knockoff, which was called an Orange.
Really?
They stayed with the fruit. It was an Apple knockoff. But in school, we used Commodore PET computers. And the only way you could load stuff is through a cassette tape. They didn't even have floppy disks then, right? And it was, it took like 5 minutes to load up a game that was basically a stick figure walking back and forth. So
Yes.
there you go.
Yes. What are your thoughts, or what are your memories of introducing or being part of the team that either had to approve or introduce the fact that, your business might need a website, your business might, like I just remember folks and companies going, why would we need a website? Like, we've got brochures, like, don't worry about it. And it's just kind of funny because every new thing that comes about, whether it's the smartphone, whether it's social media, as Ken will get into, there's always this resistance of like, why would we need that? And then, you know what? It becomes part of, what you do need to promote your business.
Oh yeah, it's why would you need a website? Why would you need an email address? Who the hell's going to send me an email? And now it's
why would you need a cell phone? They can,
yeah. Now you business can't survive without email and a website.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And I started my first business back before I went into the corporate world, or in between when I went into the corporate world, and it was really about traditional graphic design and web design back then, right around when the internet bubble was at its biggest, and people were paying astronomical sums to get a website because it had just transitioned into, oh wow, we need this, and oh wow, there's a lot of money on the internet that we're not currently capturing. But I think depending on the industry you were in, I would say there's still businesses today that undervalue what a website means to their business. Like, I often come across, a dentist in a geographic area that we're targeting to reach out to dentists in that area. And so we'll do a competitive analysis, and 99% of the dentists will have websites, and then there will be one or two that still don't have a website. And I'm like, wow, like, you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And, we've actually talked about this before, is that your website, it's not for you.
that's right.
The longer you're in business, the younger your consumer base is going to get. And like you were talking about Yellow Pages that doesn't exist anymore, they're going to pick up their phone and search for something. They're going to go to Google, Bing, God forbid, Yahoo, whatever, but that's the world they grew up in. That's all they know. And if you don't exist on the internet, if you don't have a website, you don't exist as far as the younger generations are concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with that, if you take it a step further, you don't get on the short list because oftentimes, depending on where you are, it's, someone's being asked to go and research, the top 3 dentists, the top 3 roofing companies, bring us back some names. We need some quotes. And if you're not findable, you don't get on that short list and you miss out on the opportunity.
Yeah. If you're not on Google Maps, you don't exist.
Yeah. And one thing that I don't think should be overlooked for our listeners is, that what the internet has done for smaller businesses is it's allowed you to compete with much larger businesses. Essentially, it's provided a democratization of marketing because, sometimes smaller businesses actually have the advantage because they can move quicker. They're more nimble. Whereas, yes, larger businesses might have a larger budget. They usually also have a larger target audience, meaning it might be national, international, whereas a smaller business can really focus their efforts in a way that larger businesses can't. And I think the internet has been a dramatic improvement from a marketing perspective to help small businesses compete with bigger businesses.
Yeah, and there is this trend that's been happening for the last few years that people want to shop local. They want to do business with local companies. And I think that's another advantage that small businesses have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we, Ian, you talked a little bit about social media. I want to hand it over to Ken to talk about what impact did social media have on marketing?
Okay, so now let's talk about social media. So social media, came into play and obviously had just a tremendous impact. It was a game changer. Um, and I really attribute a lot of that to Twitter, because Twitter made everything real time, or very, very near real time. And so, I remember I went to the Twitter conference in Los Angeles back in 2009, I believe, or maybe it's 2008. And it was just so exciting because the world had changed right in front of our eyes. Instead of having to wait to get, a news update, even from, a cable network like a CNN, there was still a lag between when something happened, and by the time we found out about it. With Twitter, you could find that out real time, and at the time, it wasn't super clogged with so many users and so many things going on, and you could listen into conversations and see what was going on. You could attend conferences virtually by watching Twitter, just because people were tweeting, key points that people were making in their presentation in real time. It was fascinating. I mean, it was a game changer, and I think it really has been the big driver. Then Facebook came along, and created a place for businesses to market when they created pages. And in the early days, that was fantastic because, again, there wasn't a lot of competition. It was a brand new channel. People wanted to use the channel. They were excited about it. It's before all of the polarization has happened in our world, in terms of, you know, ideas and thoughts and, whatnot. Um, Facebook also gave us the ability early on to create offers at very low costs, and oftentimes free. It gave you the ability to capture check-ins, and Foursquare came along, gave you the ability to incentivize people to leave, to check in return for being able to get a discount for, or something for free, when you did check in and you presented that at the counter. That was really cool, exciting stuff. There was nothing like it at the time. Revolutionary. We've evolved over time. Over the last 10 years, social media has become a much, much, much more visual platform, and it's all about the visuals by and large. Twitter is kind of different in that respect, and I think it's for certain people. Twitter's an incredibly important channel, has been, and I think will continue to be for a while. Um, because you can listen into those conversations through the hashtags, and you can follow the people that you're most interested in. Um, with Facebook, from a business usage perspective, it's really become a pay to play environment in my mind. You have to advertise to get your messaging seen, unless you're just a wildly popular brand already and a very big brand. The reality is, most people follow a business on social media because they're looking for a deal. It's been that way from day one, and it's still the biggest driver. People want education. They want to be entertained. Those are obviously really important considerations on social media. But at the end of the day, from a business perspective, people, they're looking for a deal. They're looking for a reason to follow your brand initially, and build that initial relationship. And ultimately, that comes down to, what are you going to give them? Value in advance. And so, now we're in an era where video has really started to dominate, and not only just video, but short form video or live video are getting preferences from the news feeds. And so if you're looking at an organic strategy, it's got to be highly visual, image based, video based, really important. And I think, finding ways to leverage video, both live video and short form video, now that TikTok is exploding. I mean, it is absolutely exploding. Now, there's a lot of questions about whether or not TikTok is going to be allowed to be in the United States. As a matter of fact, in the spending bill that Congress is looking at right now, there's a ban on TikTok being used on federal devices and in federal buildings because of the security concerns. And those are very real, and people need to take that seriously. No matter how tempting TikTok is, it may be a channel that may be yanked out from a lot of people in the US here very, very soon because of the security issues. But having said that, what TikTok is doing is changing all of the other social medias. As a matter of fact, even Google is going to, they're rolling out the search results page to be much more like a rich social media environment where it's going to combine images and videos as you scroll down, and it's going to be reading more like a news feed where it's just going to keep expanding and expanding. You're not going to have to click to go to the next page when you get to the bottom. And so, that's I think that's a good strategy for Google because they want to stay relevant and they want to keep things interesting, just like people consuming information through a news feed on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or Twitter, wherever they may be, LinkedIn. But at the same time, it also gives honestly, it gives Google more opportunity to get a lot more ads in front of a lot more people, because as you're scrolling down, and if Google's continuing to deliver interesting content as you scroll and you don't realize you're reaching the bottom of the page, not only does that have implications, for advertisers, but also for people who are trying to improve their search engine optimization. And, maybe it gives new life to some of those people who think, what, I just can't afford it, or it's not worth my while. I think you need to revisit that. But anyway, getting back to social media is driving those changes to the Google search results page. And so social media is absolutely been a major game changer in the way that we market and advertise. And I'm excited to see what's going to come next. It's interesting because we're also seeing challenges with people who are doing ads that have been limited by changes in privacy laws. As we realize what data these media companies, and that's what social media is, they're a media company, they're collecting, there's a natural pushback from governing bodies to say, wait a minute, you need to be protecting and limiting the personal information that you're gathering. So I think social media is going to continue to play a major role, whether or not it's the channels that we see today, or whether they're going to be new and emerging channels, that come along and mimic. All of these are, in one way or another, are starting to try to mimic essential features of one another to add functionality and still maintain the core reason why people use them. So anyway, it's exciting times. It has really been, since the early 2000s in the world of marketing, and I absolutely love it.
There's so much to be talking about with the history of marketing. My goodness, we could have a whole course on this. That's for sure. We could talk all afternoon, but I'm going to bring this one in for a landing. So, any last thoughts on the history of marketing, where we've come from, where we're going, before we say goodbye today?
And has Ken joined us live?
I have joined live.
Oh, you have? Oh, welcome. Yeah, I'm glad you can make it. We just went through your social media answer. So
I saw that. That guy talks a lot.
Yeah, that guy has got good information. Absolutely. Let me start with you, Ian. Any last thoughts on the history of marketing or where we're going?
No, except to say, I think one of the big trends that we're seeing is just a continuation of our current trends, right? And that's, as marketers, I hate to see people gaming the systems, and I hate to see people using platforms inappropriately, because what it does is it hurts all of us when we're trying to reach the people we're trying to reach. So meaning, text marketing is exploding right now. It's so important. It's a great way to connect with people. But in the same way, if people start to overuse it in ways that aren't appropriate, people will start to not just ignore your texts, they will start to block your texts. So I think it's, the things that have been working in the recent past will continue to work. But, we say this all the time on this podcast, but start with strategy. Look at omni-channel. How are you going to leverage that? Those are just my kind of closing thoughts. And history is fun. This was a fun topic, Jen.
Neat. Thank you. Paul, any last thoughts?
I would just say that, as we've gone through the last few years, at the beginning of COVID, people were talking about reducing their marketing budgets and cutting costs. And as we've gone through this, they've started to realize that they need to actually invest in marketing, and SEO has become more important because you need to be found organically, and paid advertising is getting more and more expensive because there's more competition. Your cost per click on Google Ads is increasing. And they've realized that you can actually do things virtually that, in the past, if you look at the educational system, they tended to be very reluctant to embrace, virtual learning. And now they're like, hey, this could actually work. We can actually do this. And I think businesses are realizing that too, that this internet fad thing isn't going away. And you can do a lot of things online. You can do a lot of things virtually. And it's because of technology, and you couldn't do these things before.
Well said. Well said. Ken, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that we're in an era now where we're back where we started, and that is all about story. Story has been what we've used to communicate, and communication, and through persuasion, is marketing. And we've used story, since we started to develop language, probably even a little bit before that, right? And now there's a renewed emphasis over the last, 3, 4, 5 years on using story and the power of story for marketing purposes. And I just think it's funny, that the whole time we've been communicating as humans, that one thing has been pervasive, and maybe we're starting to realize, hey, you know what? This is maybe ultimately the core thing we need to be focused on first when it comes to marketing and messaging.
Well said. This is a good place to wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please like and share our podcast. Please subscribe to it and help us get the word out. Tell a fellow business owner about the show. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.